Imagine this. You anger your king. Not with rebellion, not with treason, but simply with a careless word or a failure to please him. He smiles at you, gestures to his guards, and then orders you to drink from a goblet. But this isn't wine. It isn't water. It's molten gold, poured down your throat until your body seizes, your insides burn, and your silence becomes eternal. This isn't a tale of fantasy. Across history, whispers of such punishments echo from the palaces of Rome to the fortresses of medieval Europe. Tonight, we uncover the truth behind the king who forced his servants to drink molten gold, a story as much about power and greed as it is about cruelty. To understand this chilling legend, we need to peel back the layers of time. Was it a single king? A Roman general? Or a myth retold across centuries as a warning against arrogance and greed? Our story begins in ancient Rome. The wealthiest man of his time, Marcus Licinius Crassus, famous for defeating Spartacus, infamous for his insatiable greed. He measured his worth not in honor or valor, but in gold. When Crassus invaded Parthia in 53 BC, he dreamed of glory. Instead, his army was crushed in the desert sands at Carrhae. Ancient accounts say the Parthians captured him alive, and what did they do? They executed him in the most symbolic way possible, by pouring molten gold down his throat. Why? To mock his greed. To show that the man who craved wealth above all else would choke on it in death. But here's the twist. Some historians argue this tale is propaganda. Roman writers may have invented or exaggerated it, turning Crassus into a cautionary tale. Yet, the story of molten gold punishment was born. The death of Crassus was not the end. The idea of using molten gold as punishment spread like wildfire. In the 4th century, the Byzantine historian Zosimus wrote of rulers who dealt with treachery in this same fashion. Later, in Spain, medieval chroniclers claimed that tyrannical kings forced servants and rivals to swallow molten metal. The message was clear. Betrayal would be punished not only with death, but with a death that symbolized greed, defiance, and humiliation. One chilling record tells of a Spanish nobleman who angered his monarch. Instead of beheading him, the king ordered molten gold poured into his mouth, ensuring his last breath carried the weight of eternal silence. Think for a moment about the psychology behind this punishment. Beheading ends life quickly. Hanging is brutal, but common. Even crucifixion, as savage as it was, carried religious and symbolic undertones. But molten gold? This was not only death, it was a performance. A spectacle meant to terrify everyone watching. It transformed execution into theater, turning the king into both executioner and storyteller. The message, I control life, death, and even the meaning of wealth itself. At this point, you might be asking, could this really happen? Could molten gold even be forced down someone's throat? Modern scientists have explored this gruesome question. Gold melts at over 1,000 degrees Celsius. At that heat, the metal wouldn't just burn, it would incinerate flesh instantly. Pouring it into a human mouth would char the lips, throat, and lungs in a matter of seconds. Death would be almost instantaneous. But here's the catch. Some scholars argue that it wasn't literal molten gold. Instead, it may have been a symbolic gesture, pouring molten-like substances, or even hardened gold, into the victim's mouth after death as a warning to others. So was it real? Or was it theater, ritual, and myth combined? Crassus was not the only one said to suffer this fate. In the 13th century, chronicles tell of Mongol generals who punished corrupt governors in similar fashion. The Spanish Inquisition, too, carries whispers of molten punishment. But perhaps the most striking is the legend of a wealthy Spanish noblewoman. Her crime? Hoarding gold that belonged to the crown. When discovered, she was forced to drink molten metal as justice. The account is debated, but it reinforces the symbolic power. Gold, treasure, greed, ambition was transformed into poison. Here's something to consider. Why gold? Why not molten iron, bronze, or lead? The answer lies in symbolism. Iron was a weapon's metal, harsh, common, unremarkable. But gold? Gold was divine. It was wealth, status, immortality. To turn that symbol of luxury into an instrument of death was a ruler's ultimate display of power. It was a way of saying, I command not only your life, but also the very meaning of riches. So far, we've traced the origins of this punishment, the kings who embraced it, and the shocking symbolism it carried. But in the second half of our journey, we'll go deeper. We'll examine eyewitness accounts, explore the myths that surround this golden death, and uncover how this legend continues to haunt our imagination even today. Stay with us, because the story is far from over. We've uncovered the legendary beginnings of this gruesome punishment, from the fall of Crassus in Rome to tyrants in Spain and beyond. But the question still lingers. Was this a real practice, or just a terrifying myth designed to keep people obedient? Let's dig deeper into the eyewitness accounts, the political motives behind the story, and the echoes of this golden death in our modern imagination. One of the most puzzling aspects of this tale is how often it's told without hard evidence. Roman historians like Cassius Dio and Plutarch wrote of Crassus' death in Parthia, but even they contradicted one another. Some claimed he was executed with molten gold. Others said he was simply killed, and the molten gold detail was added later as a moral lesson. Byzantine chroniclers, too, spoke of rulers who carried out the punishment, but their sources often relied on rumor or secondhand tales. This raises an unsettling question. Were these deaths real, or were they convenient pieces of propaganda, crafted to make tyrants look more terrifying and rebels more foolish? Consider the spectacle. Executions in the ancient world weren't just about killing. They were about sending a message. Crucifixions, public beheadings, executions in arenas. All of them were staged for the crowd. The molten gold story fits perfectly into this pattern. Whether it actually happened or not almost doesn't matter. What mattered was that everyone believed it could happen. And that fear of choking on the very thing you desired most, kept populations under control. There's also a moral element. In nearly every version of the tale, the victim is greedy, corrupt, or disloyal. Crassus craved wealth beyond measure. Noblemen hid gold from their kings. Governors pocketed treasure instead of paying tribute. The golden death becomes less about justice and more about morality. It's a story used by rulers and storytellers alike. If you love gold too much, it will be your undoing. Think about it. It's not just a punishment. It's a sermon burned into the memory of all who hear it. And here's where it gets fascinating. This wasn't just a Roman or Spanish idea. Versions of molten metal punishments appear in Indian, Persian, and even Chinese sources. In Mongolia, enemies of the Khan were rumored to be killed by molten silver or gold. In each culture, the symbolism shifted slightly. For the Mongols, it was about demonstrating the futility of resisting empire. For European kings, it symbolized the price of greed. For the Parthians, it was mocking the Romans. Different motives, same chilling image. Gold turned from treasure into death. You might think the story ends in the Middle Ages, but the golden death has echoed into modern times. In literature, it appears in cautionary tales and novels as a metaphor for greed. In fantasy and film, tyrants use molten gold to execute traitors, terrifying audiences just as ancient kings once terrified their subjects. Even today, when we hear the phrase, drinking molten gold, we don't just imagine death, we imagine poetic justice. The punishment has become a symbol, a metaphor that outlives the kings who may or may not have ever practiced it. Now comes the haunting question. Could such a punishment actually be carried out in our modern world? Technically, yes. Scientifically, molten gold is lethal in seconds. But practically, it's far more likely the story will remain legend rather than reality. Instead, it survives as a cautionary tale, not about kings and their cruelty, but about how greed can destroy, about how wealth, if worshipped too deeply, becomes the very poison that consumes us. So, was there truly a king who forced his servants to drink molten gold? Maybe, maybe not. The records are murky, the details contested. But in a sense, the answer doesn't matter.